Let me kick right into the agenda here. I thought I'd cover sort of three foundational points, setting up the rest of this day with a bit more of a focus on eSIM for IoT. Because I love the research that was shown, some really good insights Pablo talks about. But in his best case scenario, he's got 8 billion, right, I think was the total by 2030 smartphones, 8. The GSMA's own number for IoT devices by 2030 is 75 billion, right? 75 billion IoT devices by 2030. So the consumer, half of them apparently have made up their mind, half haven't, about whether they want to use eSIM. IoT, you really don't have a choice, right? I can look at my phone and decide, okay, I can change the SIM, no problem. It's a pretty easy thing to do, actually. My 82-year-old dad won't do it, but most of us will switch out the SIM. When I have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of devices out there that I'm trying to manage, I don't even know where they are. The notion of changing out a SIM, forget about it, right? So you have to have technology that allows you to change in the field to whatever connectivity best suits you. And oh, by the way, roaming is on its way to its deathbed. And so you better have a provider that provides you local connectivity, local eSIM profiles to provide that best quality of service at the best price point possible. That's what we're going to set up today. That's what we've built here at Core. But I'm going to introduce Core. I'm going to talk a little bit basics on eSIM, and then we'll talk about some of the specific benefits of eSIM, and I'll set up the panel that's going to talk about a couple of things, okay? The chip-to-cloud security and zero-touch provisioning. Okay, so first, who's Core? So we started 20 years ago, primarily in IoT connectivity. I joined the company about 5 years ago and realized all of these complexities that I'm just talking about is what has held IoT back. When we look at why IoT stayed in its hype phase for so long, it was primarily because of the complexities of deploying an IoT solution. We asked our customers to put all the Lego bricks together yourselves. We said, oh, get a device, get a modular radio that works, figure out, antenna and how and positioning, and then get them out there, manage them yourself. Well, forget about it. Most of us, most companies went into IoT deployments, did not meet our business cases. 2/3 of all proof of concepts and pilots were failing per a Cisco study in 2016. 2/3. Less than 30% IoT projects were being called successes. So we went about doing the work to help make it easy for customers to adopt. We put together a 7-step framework of what it takes to do an IoT deployment. We provide many of those services ourselves, and the 7 deliverables under each of those 7 steps ourselves to become that one-stop shop, to become that pure play with the strategy that says help you deploy, manage, and scale, okay? Our portfolio of services from that connectivity-only beginning is now connectivity solutions and analytics. And I hope you'll call us as you look to deploy or look to scale, and especially when you take your pilot from one region of the world where it's relatively easy to do. When you want to go global, you want to go to 10 countries, 30 countries, 50 countries, we hope you'll call us because we can get all that done with one pane of glass. And if you saw our ModGo announcement yesterday, a SaaS tool to actually help deployments as well. Okay, so now let's do the sort of 101 on eSIM a little bit. So remarkably, the term eSIM actually has come to now stand for this EUICC standard, really, right? The GSMA standard that allows for a smart SIM to be updated out in the field. You can bring down a profile over the air and switch to whatever carrier you want. But the term actually comes from a form factor of an embedded SIM. And there's still confusion in the market out there today. So we're not talking about a form factor here, folks. We're not talking about an embedded SIM per se. What we're talking about is the smart card where you can download. The other big movement is one of real estate, right? As devices, we want to get them smarter. We want to get them smaller. The form factor is getting smaller and smaller, and eventually it's forcing its way into where eSIM will be coded into the silicon itself, right? It'll be on the chipset itself. You won't necessarily have a plastic card. So that's what we're talking about. And while, again, Pablo is right that for IoT, eSIM is in its very early stages of development, I think the sheer force of you have to do it, is starting to come true now. Because in a recent, I think it was Kaleido research that this is based on, 85% of cellular IoT adopters have eSIM in their roadmap or are already starting to deploy. And that's a pretty powerful, powerful story. Okay, so why am I saying so confidently that eSIM, in fact, look, 5G will help, edge compute and all of these trends will help. These are all tailwinds to adopt IoT. But I think eSIM will be the single largest driver of IoT adoption. Why? Because it gets you on the journey to the single SKU. There's a reason, by the way, that 2 of these factors are up at the top. We think those are way more powerful than the other 3, although all 5 are important. So what's the single SKU? Why is this important? Let's go back to this manufacturer that wants to ship connected products to, let's say, 50 countries, 75 countries, right? If you went with a couple of carriers per country, you're talking about 100 or 150 carrier relationships. The number of contracts, the number of lawyers you would need just to negotiate those contracts, the number of platforms you'd be plugging into, it's an impossible challenge. So you have to work with Core, which will bring all of that down to one screen and orchestrate over the complexities. It's going to be 2G in Brazil for the next 5 years. There's no 2G left in the United States already, right? Those complexities we can manage across and bring it to one screen. But you haven't solved the back-end problem. You haven't solved the SIM problem. You still need a SIM that's coded to be secure enough to get onto the networks in these countries, right? So now you've got 100, 150 more. In fact, I met a customer yesterday that's got 2 million SIMs out in the field. They've got 185 SKUs. We've got to get these OEMs or these customers who are deploying in many solutions in many countries down on that journey to one SIM card. Think about the massive simplification of your supply chains. Think about the massive savings of how many SKUs you have in stock. The forecasts are wrong the day we're written. We all know that, right? You'll never have exactly the right SIMs you need when it's time to go ship. And oh, by the way, mistakes happen. You send Danish SIMs to the Netherlands. Now there's a bunch of customer abrasion and huge cost to go out and change those SIMs, right? The journey to one SIM is so much more important as a driver of eSIM adoption and frankly of IoT adoption than this notion of, oh, we'll just switch carriers. I actually don't think we're going to see that much switching of carriers going on across these use cases because that's not where the benefit is. You're not going to save a few pennies. If it's working, you're likely to just leave it alone. The benefit is getting to one SKU. I hope I've made that point. So actually, because I mentioned the switching of carriers, let's talk about resiliency. Sure, it's important, right? In my neighborhood in Atlanta, where Core is headquartered, AT&T lost service to a tower, right? So my service really went to heck. So I'm sitting back saying, I need to change my service or something else has to happen. Now they ended up sending me a small adapter to do the power. But yeah, having an eSIM would be helpful because I can just switch. So that gives me resilience, right? Great. It's a benefit, absolutely. The far more, again, powerful benefit is one of future-proofing. Because if you work with the right, and we would like to say we are the right leading platform for eSIM, we will actually future-proof you from generation to generation, right? This pain, this trauma that all our customers had to face as 2G and 3G was sunsetting goes away if you have the right smart SIM technology that transitions you to 4G, transitions you to 5G, et cetera, again, over the air without a truck roll, as we call it in the industry, at $150 or $200 average to go change that SIM card. So very powerful benefits, makes it much easier to adopt IoT. And the last two, I'll probably say the least about, if only because my panelists, Nicholas and Dan, will be talking to these 2 points specifically, and also because I have 2 specific slides on them. So let's just talk about these 2, the roaming and security and provisioning on the next 2 slides. So first of all, roaming SIMs, right? So for the last few years, all kinds of smart SIMs and global SIMs and eSIMs have been advertised off of the back of roaming propositions at very attractive price points. Most would argue that that was an abuse of the roaming arrangements between MNOs. Roaming arrangements are made for people like us. We get off the plane in Barcelona, I need my phone to work. I'm clearly a roamer. I go back in 6 days, right? It's not for a device that's going to go sit there, quote, permanently. Permanent roaming isn't a thing, folks. Countries will stop you. Carriers in countries that don't have government policies around it will stop you, are well within their rights to knock your devices off of their networks. And most, in the US, for example, will do 90-day audits to see how many devices are permanently roaming, right? Because, again, you're not allowed to do that. Which is why, for 20 years, we have now built back-end integrations with 45 major MNOs around the world. Which is why we are accumulating the world's best collection of eSIM profiles. If I can't get an IMSI range from a carrier yet, that'll also come. We'll get eSIM profiles, we'll download them, we will connect you locally in a risk-free type environment. 40% of my business is connected health. You want to put cardiac rhythm monitoring patients at risk on a roaming arrangement that could be taken off one day? Do you want to put your trucks at risk? I think the answer is not in many use cases. For some use cases, maybe, right? And we will have those conversations with you, and if you choose to take the risk as a customer, c'est la vie, we won't necessarily, suggest that you go there. So the first thing, about us is we're not forcing a roaming relationship on you. We can put OmniSIM, Core OmniSIM is our eSIM. OmniSIM Reach is one of them, one of the types, if you will. There's OmniSIM Rush for high bandwidth, but OmniSIM Reach will connect you in 190 countries. Now, for that, we will use up to 3 IMSIs, maybe more if your use case requires it, in what's called a bootstrap profile. It'll connect automatically where it is, tell us where it is, we'll download. If one of the slots doesn't already have the right connectivity profile, carrier profile, we'll download it over the air, we'll connect you off locally, and off you go. But again, please, right, think hard, ask the questions. There's a bunch of fear, uncertainty, doubt out there, a bunch of smoke and mirrors out there, people making up their own quadrants and all this stuff. Please understand whether you're implementing a roaming solution or not, and we would be happy to help consult on that topic. So that's the point about not being a roaming SIM. Let's move on to how do you really now scale eSIM. So I've got 2 million devices I'm going to deploy over the next couple of years. I use the cloud, whoever your favorite cloud provider is, AWS, Azure. There's a fairly painful process of 1 million downloads of some kind of security certificate that'll connect you back up to the cloud, right? Managing through that process. Getting to that sort of nirvana stage of, zero-touch provisioning, automatic provisioning, is a huge step forward. Doing it in a highly secure, and I'll come back to GSMA standards because we build everything to GSMA standards, the safe standard, now you're really talking, right? Now you're really taking a lot of pain out of this process. And so these are the benefits, right? The security with the safe standard, the cost, obviously, because you're just leveraging the SIM that's in the device anyway today, or one day it'll be iSIM, and that's fine. Scalable with APIs and the provisioning, and of course, all very simple. And again, my colleagues and partners are going to talk about this on the panel next. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up Nicholas and Dan Quant, who I'm sure will introduce themselves. And is it you, Yolanda? Okay. Thank you very much.